One relational dynamic that we have yet to talk about when it comes to interpersonal relationship is this idea of power and what power does to relationships. And so I'm going to break this down into a number of different types of power. And I want to do this with one of my favorite movies. It's a film called The Natural. It came out long before your time, way back when. It's based on a book written in 1954, which was based on a true story that was going on at the time. Not necessarily the story of the natural itself, but what happened with somebody going around and killing Major League Baseball players who they felt who were in their prime. So, spoiler alert. Okay. That has something to do with the story. But even more so, there's some great characters in this film that to go through and are wonderful depictions of the types of power we have in relationships. And so I'm going to use those characters. First off, though, let me list the different types of power here. There's referent power, legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power, persuasive power, and lastly, informative power. And some folks put persuasive and informative into the same bucket. I think they need to be treated a little bit differently here, especially at a time when we've seen informative power rear its little ugly head here over the last 8 years or so there and what's going on. So to start with, then, let's get into this idea of referent power. And I've called this the I want to be like Mike power. You might not know who I'm talking about when I refer to Mike anymore as well. Referent power is where we idolize somebody else. We might pattern our lives after somebody else. We might go through and say, well, I want to be like this particular person because of their attributes. And while there's something probably good and noble about that, to pattern ourselves after somebody we think might espouse the types of personality characteristics and things that we want to get into, when we do so, we give a bit of ourselves away to that person. I had a very strong mentor when I was in college, and it was another student, a student who was older than I, and a student who was in some kind of an ecclesiastical leadership position to me. But I just idolized this guy, right? I thought he could do no wrong, and later got into a wonderful relationship and became this wonderful father, and all kinds of things, that agreed with what I thought I would like to be as an individual, right up until the person, it became known that they had a cocaine addiction and crashed and burned in a very violent way. And at that point, I'm like you'd be, you were kind of left to go through and question, well, wait a minute, wasn't what I saw reality? And I'm here to tell you that what you see in most people isn't, okay? It's what they want you to see. And that's the inherent problem with referent power. When we give up a little bit of ourselves to go through and admire somebody else, we're kind of giving them some kind of power over that. Well, in the film, we're introduced to Roy Hobbs, the main character. That's not this guy here. This guy is the whammer, and he's actually kind of the representative of Babe Ruth in the story here, played by Joe Don Baker, and very well done here as well. And this guy is a star, right? Just like what professional sports does to us, we become enamored with people in sports. And the whammer, the Babe Ruth icon in the story, is that referent power. And what's interesting is Roy Hobbs, the main character, the Robert Redford character in the film, doesn't give him that referent power. He holds it to himself. He doesn't go through and surrender that. I grew up in Montreal, Canada, with hockey. I lived in a neighborhood that actually had the captain of the Montreal Canadiens lived in the same neighborhood. And man, I love John Ferguson. He was a great guy. And, he never gave me a reason to not be referent there. So good or bad, right or wrong, whatever. We just need to be careful to understand what we end up releasing when we get involved with referent power. The second type of power is a legitimate power. And that is where somebody has power over us. In some contexts, it's very easy to define. In this baseball context, for example, the coach here, Pops, has power over the team. Then he has an assistant coach over there as well on the left-hand side of the screen. And Pops is the one he's been designated the coach, and he's the one who makes the calls as to who's up and who's not, and what the lineups can be, all those kinds of things. He has that kind of legitimate power. You might have a boss at work who has legitimate power. You might ascribe me as your professor with some level of legitimate power. And I've been given that because I have the credentials, I have the tenure, I have proven myself in order to receive that power. So legitimate power isn't just bestowed upon somebody willy-nilly, right? They don't just get it because we think they're legit. Legitimate power is bestowed and often abused, though, through some type of line of certification. We give legitimate power to a physician. In the military, there's legitimate power established through rank. A police officer pulls you over, and we succumb to the, and I'm doing air quotes here, legitimate power of the badge. But often that power can be abused, and we need to be careful with that kind of power and maybe investigate where that legitimate power is coming from. In relationships, especially in traditional relationships, there can be some notions that legitimate power is also established by gender. Okay, that the male, by virtue of their maleness, has legitimate power over the female. Now, this isn't me talking, okay? I'm just talking about kind of legitimate cultural contexts, traditional cultural contexts that are out there that now are starting to turn a bit, okay? We're starting to see this shift because as equality, and I can't believe I'm still even saying this at my age and having gone through watching what happens to equality, but with equality now still kind of becoming more forefront as far as women are concerned, okay? The whole idea of legitimate power within a relationship is starting to become more debatable, I guess, as I'm trying to be politically correct here. It's probably the better word to say there as far as that is concerned. Is there legitimate power in a romantic relationship, in a significant other relationship? That's the question maybe that needs to be asked. I'm here to tell you, no, absolutely not. The power differential that exists between my spouse and I is very narrow. We have power over our own finances. We share bills and things and the house payments, but everything else is our own. I don't know what she has in her checking account. She doesn't know what I have in mine, because we're responsible enough to go through and take care of the needs we have as a couple, and then take care of the needs that we have as individuals within that marriage. Money is one of the main influencers in establishing the myth of legitimate power in relationships. So if we have a breadwinner and somebody who's staying at home, somehow there's this shift in the legitimacy of the power that we have going on, and that's just not healthy to go through and maintain that way within a romantic, committed relationship. The next kind of power out there is reward power. We use this power with training animals. I have a snack to give my dogs if they go through, and I can reward them if they do the kind of behavior that I want them to get into. And the reason why I'm reducing it down to something that elementary is because that's how reward power works. Okay, you want to, I want you to do something, and in order for me to get you to do something, I'll give you a reward. In the film The Natural, the judge has reward power. The judge is actually the owner of the team, and he offers Roy a reward if Roy throws the game. Spoiler alert. Okay? And he's in a position to do so because he's a very wealthy, powerful man, as you see portrayed here within this image. He's a great antagonist in this film. He's able to go through and exercise that kind of reward power. But Roy Hobbs, being true to himself in the game of baseball, does not succumb to the judge's reward power. Well, what kind of rewards are out there anyway? The number one reward power in relationships is sex. Okay, I'm just going to let that sink in a little bit there, because there are folks out there who will do anything for it, and there are folks out there who will do anything to resist it. And somewhere in the middle, hopefully, sex isn't used as a reward or a punishment. This can go both ways that way as far as power is concerned there. But we need to recognize that when it is used as reward or punishment, it is being abused within the relationship. Okay, even just affections or time spent or a dozen roses or whatever, if it's given in a sense of some expectation that something should be given back, okay, as far as that reward, oh, you treated me this way, here I'm going to go through and give you the reward as a result of this, then that becomes a dysfunctional power differential within the relationship. I'm thinking you're going to see an evolution of a pattern here within this presentation that none of these powers really are appropriate in relationships. Okay. But I'll move on. That's not going to stop me here, because I'm going to dig into the darker power of relationships. And no, I'm not going to put up a Star Wars figure or anything there. But I am going to put up a dark figure from the film. That power is coercive power. It's where we get our partner to concede to something against their will. Coercion. And we can do this psychologically, or we can do this physically. Either way, though, is an abuse of power within a relationship. I don't know of a situation involved with a relationship with a human being, other than maybe in prison, and even that becomes questionable, where we would use coercive power. And like I said, that can happen on two levels. It can happen psychologically, or it can happen physically. In the film, it happens psychologically. It happens with the guy on the left here, not Kim Bassinger's character on the right, Mimo Paris, but Gus Sands. And he's a bookie. Gus has this glass eye in the movie that enables him to see, down the line as far as how bets are going to be placed and so on. And he tries to coerce Roy Hobbs into throwing a game so he can win a bet there. And he does that with Mimo here in certain ways, which I'll get back to here in just a minute. But he's, and again, because Roy Hobbs holds to his integrity, he doesn't bow down or become subject or a victim to this kind of coercive power that Gus Sands tries to exercise on him. If you are involved in a relationship where you are the victim of coercive power, like I've talked about in the clips on conflict, you probably need to reevaluate why you're staying in that relationship. The next one is expert power, and we go to experts. Oh, it's almost like legitimate power, but here expert power doesn't necessarily have the credential or the, I don't know what else to call it, the credits to go along and determine whether they are legitimate power. Expert power, we're going to a physician because of their study of medicine. They're an expert in that. Or you're taking your car to a mechanic because they are an expert in what's going on there. And it's fascinating here because, again, we surrender a part of us involved in that expert power, right? I've gotten to a point, because I'm capable and cheap, that when something breaks, I'll take it apart, because I'm like, well, if it's broken, then what more damage could I possibly do other than maybe run the risk of trying to fix it? And gosh, 9 times out of 10, I'm able to fix it. I'm able to fix our dryer and put a new element in there, as opposed to calling up an appliance repair person, an expert, to come in and repair that dryer for me for the cost of a new dryer, really, at the same time. It's just a matter of taking the risk and being vulnerable enough to dig in and see what's going on there. I haven't studied appliance repair. I'm no electrician, but there's YouTube. Man, YouTube makes us an expert at everything, right? Well, This can run a risk of being an expert in a relationship, and you've rubbed up against this. Somebody who knows everything or has the answer to, they're especially with the birth of a child. And suddenly you're surrounded by experts, and maybe that expert is your mother-in-law or somebody that way. And no disrespect to mothers. If you've had a child, there are some experts out there, right, who know how to go through and do the job. No question about that. But within a dyad, within a romantic relationship, this whole expert power can get a little long on the tooth, okay? Roy Hobbs definitely is the expert here. This guy knows how to swing a bat, and he knows how to throw a curveball. And he's done that through lots and lots of practice. And that's what turns Roy Hobbs into the star, is because of his expertise. Next is this idea of persuasive power, and that's where Memo Paris comes in. And she is very persuasive, okay, with her trying to distract Roy Hobbs from his game. She becomes kind of the bad luck charm to Roy's game. Another spoiler alert, when Roy gets involved with Memo, his game goes to pot because she has this tendency to do that with all baseball players as she goes through and makes the round. She's very persuasive with Roy, and of course she can be persuasive with her beauty, her sensuality, her charm, her attention, her physical aspect with Roy, her sex, all that kind of stuff goes through, and blinds Roy, persuades him not to see what's going on within his life. Persuasive power is definitely psychological. If it's physical, it's coercive power. And it's rooted in our values. If something resonates with us and our values, we are more inclined to come into agreement with whatever that persuasive tactic might be. And again, when we do so, if we are easily persuaded, we are giving up our own power. We're giving up something of ourselves there in order to go through and answer what that persuasive appeal might be. I teach a class on persuasion. If you want to know more, if I ever teach it again, I'd be glad to have you in class. Lastly is this idea of informative power. And that's where I know something you don't know. And as a result of me knowing something you don't know, I have more power in the relationship. This is a self-centered, egotistical, kind of a narcissistic type of power that's out there. And we know now more painfully than ever that information is power, just so long as it's the right information, right? Or factual information, those kinds of things, because we know the opposite of that can turn into something that becomes very abusive. Well, in the natural, we have Max Mercer. Max is a journalist. He's a writer. Actually, he illustrates. He does cartoons, but he can make or break the careers of baseball players here at this time. And Max has that informational power. What he's trying to figure out, where did Roy Hobbs come from? Now, I won't spoil that for you because that's an integral part of the story. Max never finds out, but he keeps digging. And the reason why is because information for Max is power. It enables him to either make or break Roy Hobbs as this baseball star, greater than Babe Ruth kind of a thing. When we withhold information from somebody, we have power. We are deceptive in doing so, okay? But it gives us some level of power within that relationship, and that's not a healthy power to have. We might look at power as something that we want to aspire to, and, really, in most relationships, I don't think so. I don't think so. There's one very powerful, in the different sense of the word, character in Roy Hobbs' story, and that is Iris here. Iris was Roy Hobbs' first love. They grew up together, and when Roy got called up to go into playing in the minors, they in their romance, in their wonderful relationship, had a nice farewell, and then Roy disappears in the story, and I won't spoil that one for you. But then they're reunited later on in the story, when we find out that Iris is the mom of Roy's 16-year-old son, And Roy has no idea he has this boy there, right? So here is Iris, and she has a lot of power here that she could exercise over Roy Hobbs that would take him away from the game. The Roy expresses to her that he just wants to be able to walk down the street and for people to say, "Wow, there goes Roy Hobbs, the best baseball player that ever was." That's it. That's his simple result of his life. That's all he wanted. And she, at that moment, is prepared to tell him that he has a son. And when she hears that, she decides not to exercise that power and to allow Roy to continue on. It's not until afterwards, spoiler alert, when she makes that revelation happen. It's a great story. She is happy with herself. She's very self-contained. She has lots of confidence. She's very assertive. She's very successful in having grown up and been a single mother her whole life, which I really enjoyed that depiction of that dyad, that idea of family very early. This movie came out in the early 80s. To come out with a very positive depiction of a single mother there as well was fascinating. But her character here with Roy Hobbs, she does not exercise her power, okay, and allows Roy to do what he's going to do, which puts him on a path to come back to her. And yeah, it's Hollywood, and that's the movies, and that's how it goes. But those are the powers: referent power, legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power, persuasive power, and informative power. The main thing here for you to understand, gosh, and I thought I had this written down in a slide, but I don't, is this very thing. And this is going to come back and haunt you. So I need you to pay attention to this. The person in the relationship with the most amount of power is the one with the least amount of interest. Okay? Ruiz teaches that. It's kind of a universal tenet out there. Let me put that another way. A person in the relationship with the least amount of interest is the one with the most power. Now, that might show up on a test here, but you know what? It is going to show up later on in your life, if not maybe like tomorrow. Okay? All right. Well, that's all I have to say about power in relationships. Thanks for watching.